Sit in order.
We gotta sit in order.
Well, good morning. So this panel is about smart building technology, and we've got some great panelists. We're talking backstage about, like, we're going to ask questions, but if there's controversy, that'll be interesting as well. So let's talk about the Green New Deal. We talk about innovation, adoption, and the catalyst for adoption, especially in smart buildings. A lot of it tends to be more of a vitamin than a painkiller and more of a nice to have. But then when you have regulatory things like the Green New Deal, does that behave as a catalyst for adoption, or is it just another painful thing you have to comply with?
Want me to start? Well, I think if people think that that bill is about optimization or efficiency, they're kidding themselves. It's really about source energy. Because what that bill really does is says if you're using fossil fuels and you generate carbon, you have to meet a certain level that has nothing to do with actually what people are doing in the building. So I think there will be, obviously, we're going to have to measure carbon, and at Rudin we already do. We've actually cut our carbon by 44%, our electric by 41%, and our steam by 48%. But it's really about, I'm going to have to knock on KPMG's door and say, hey, during tax season, you can't work after hours because you're using too much energy. So I think at the end of the day for New York, if we're going to continue to be the city that never sleeps, that bill needs to be modified.
Yeah.
So, KP.
Yeah.
I adore John Gilbert. He is one of the most forward-looking people in this industry when it comes to energy. But I'm very passionate about climate change. That's what we do at the Urban Future Lab. And although I understand John's point, I think we've had the benchmarking laws in place for almost 10 years now. And the benchmarking laws were meant to tell the real estate industry that you have to pay attention to this, and that if we put the numbers in front of you, maybe you'll do something about this, because you'll see what your energy use intensity, how it's harming you. Yeah. That's a first step. It's a good first step. This, I think, is a good, although very flawed, second step. I think when you have use categories that combine a kindergarten building and a science lab at a university, call them both educational facilities, and have the same GHG cap, that's a terrible error, and John's absolutely right. However, there will be an advisory panel. We will sort that out. I think it's a very good step at something we really have to be doing. We've only got 10 years to solve this.
Nigel, as a technologist, I always think problem solution. There's got to be an innovation. I mean, is this going to be a catalyst for any innovation to drive compliance?
I mean, I feel like the innovations have happened, but no one's actually using them. We're New York City's largest office tenant. We've committed to reduce significant reductions in our carbon footprint and energy reduction. I can't tell you what we use in 40% of our buildings in New York City because the infrastructure in the building doesn't provide that information for us. So landlords and developers are still building buildings that don't provide us with energy data on a floor-by-floor basis, on a disaggregated basis, so I can't understand what I'm spending on lighting versus what I'm spending on other things. So for us to even start thinking about reducing our energy consumption, first we have a massive exercise to go through all of our buildings and install sub-meters, technology that's been there for years and years and years and just isn't being adopted.
You are so lucky you're moving into Doc 72 because we're going to give you real-time data.
But I don't have that data at 110 Wall Street, which we've been in for the last 4 years.
Well, it's because you won't let us put an Anthem in.
And we also have, at the Urban Future Lab, we have all the technologies that any real estate owner would need to solve this problem. Right? We have something called Enertive that I believe you guys are invested in, that gives you real-time energy data, circuit by circuit. We have a company called Malka that can help you to regularize your benchmarking data so that it's not messy, some gross square feet, some net square feet. We have all the technologies that are needed inside the Urban Future Lab. So as Rit was saying earlier, if you were here for the opening remarks from Sidewalk Labs, Rit was saying that we haven't really changed the technologies we're using for 40 years. And that's not because the technology is not available. That's because we are by nature a risk-averse industry. I'm an architect. I understand that, right? We're very liability conscious. But the technologies do exist. We're nurturing them at the Urban Future Lab. We've had 50 companies since 2009, all of whom have market-ready solutions verified by the General Services Administration. Is that good enough for you? NREL. We have really great technologies that are ready for prime time. And I think what's happening now with things like the GHG bill are that the risks of not doing it now suddenly outweigh the risks of doing it. So it's time for the real estate industry to use these technologies.
Yeah, it's interesting. Within 2 months, every pitch deck I get now has a catalyst of this bill. Like, oh, we're now going to take off because it's a compliance issue and it's a market. And I kind of look at history, and there's lots of compliance things that never really took off. Do you guys think that in terms of implementation, execution, this is going to be?
I think that's such a sad commentary for our industry.
Yeah.
Like, why do we need legislation to start bringing in this technology? Like you've said, these technologies have been around forever, but to adopt them at scale, it seems to be that we need the government to come along and tell us that we've got to do it. Like, that's just wrong.
I mean, I imagine both of y'all have already been thinking. I mean, it's not new news for you, and you probably have strategies in place.
We've got a system that we've been running for the last 3 years. I can show you real time how many people I've got in my buildings, individually and collectively. It's called Nantum. I can show you how much carbon we're producing in real time. I've got predictive and prescriptive analytics that ultimately allow us to use the data that we collected yesterday to be smarter tomorrow. It's saving us 55 cents a foot, which is $5.5 million across our 10 million square foot office portfolio. And the beauty of it is it's been adopted by the largest bank in the world, the largest asset manager in the world, the largest REIT, the largest landowner, and we just won a major competition with the GSA Proving Ground to start putting it in GSA-owned buildings.
I mean, to larger landlords or owner, I mean, you guys have the wherewithal and capacity to address. I mean, what happens to a building owner that's less than WeWork or Rudin that doesn't have the resources, hasn't been tracking it? Is that going to be a problem for them in terms of compliance?
Well, I think if you're willing to spend 10 cents a foot to save 55 cents, it's a pretty easy value prop. I think on the screen you're looking at Nantum right now. You can see that there's 19,563 people in our current, right now in our portfolio. We're burning 21 megawatts of power. I've already consumed 209,000 gallons of water, and we're consuming in real time 60 pounds of steam. You can then slice and dice that. We're working very closely with the largest asset manager in the world. They've got 16 floors at 40 East 52nd Street, and we've saved an additional 14% simply by giving them the data on a floor-by-floor basis. So the more granular you can get, the more we expand the central nervous system of a building. Buildings have always had a heart, engine room, boiler room. Now they have a brain, Nantum. The final frontier is the central nervous system. How many sensors? What are we sensing? What interval are we sensing at? And then how are we using that data? People like to say, well, data is the new oil. Well, but it's crude oil. Unless we use software as the refinery to make that data useful, who cares?
Yeah.
I think one of our frustrations here is that New York City isn't entirely made up of owner-occupiers and whole building tenants. And I think a lot of the tools that are being put out there are really targeted around that, people where you've got a facilities engineer that's running a building, and it's a tool that's designed for the facilities engineer to make their building run more efficiently. But there's little thought given in the smart buildings industry generally to kind of the smaller tenants that make up a lot of the real estate in New York City. So like if we want to start making a dent, I really think we need to start thinking about tools for tenants, tools for office managers to run their single floor that don't have an engineering degree, that can't dive in and understand all of the kind of engineering mechanisms that they need to understand to run a building more efficiently. They just want to have an impact, but we're not providing tools for them.
Well, in your case, you're mostly a large tenant and of influence, but it's not your building. So you're adopting whatever building systems you walk into, and you're trying to interact with them. So that's a kind of increased level of difficulty.
So we try to negotiate in our leases now that a landlord gives us read-write access to the BMS because we want to actually start making a change within our space. 90% of our landlords push back on that. They're not interested in giving us, even giving us data, even giving us read access to the BMS to be able to understand how we're using our space, understanding how we can make an impact. That sort of landlord-tenant dichotomy that still exists in the industry, we're 30 years ago,
Is that a deal breaker?
particularly in New York.
Is that a deal breaker for you? I mean, is it more of a nice to have?
I would love to make it a deal breaker. I'm pushing to make it a deal breaker. Our real estate team doesn't quite agree with me, but we're getting there.
So I think the other thing we need that you touched on was some very simple tools for less sophisticated building owners and for tenants. And we have many of those in our portfolio. We have something from Israel called Zero Energy Solutions that's for individual room units that are doing air conditioning and heating instead of an overall building system so that they can be networked and controlled. We have Radiator Labs, which is a very simple radiator cover that prevents radiator from blasting out its heat, losing it all instantly, and then having to blast out again later, but it releases the heat based on some data analytics. We have a lot of very simple tools for smaller buildings and for less sophisticated users.
So so most startups, their target list is these two, right? It's not the middle unknown owner. So you think something like this maybe creates a little bit of a catalyst for these startups to go after more the middle market owner that now has to worry about it and doesn't have resources.
I'd love to see the target being the people that occupy the buildings. We shouldn't be targeting facilities managers or owners. We should be targeting people that sit in buildings.
Wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of those. It's just such a disaggregated market that it's very difficult for a small startup to sell to such a disaggregated market.
In a city like New York, where there's a lot of aging buildings, it's a lot, brand new building, buy the best BMS system, put in all the best practices. What about in aging buildings where the infrastructure is harder to deal with, deploying it is harder, there's a materials issue, there's systems issues, there's a lot of issues. And they were just built for a different use case back when. How are you all addressing, and how do you see that changing?
I mean, we're running, I've got an 80-year-old building on West 86th Street that we're using Radiator Labs, and I'm actually measuring, input and output in steam traps. So the wireless technology, as long as you can create that ubiquitous wireless network, again, that's the central nervous system that I was speaking about earlier. Once you do that, you can then access that data, and if you do have smart software, you can ultimately use that to really create efficiencies. So it doesn't really matter the age of the building. I mean, and it doesn't matter whether the building has a BMS. Ultimately, we think that the BMS is heading to the cloud. It may be an on-prem cloud, but private cloud, but ultimately, if you can grab data and if you can get it to the cloud where you can wrap your analytics around it, you can have huge impacts very quickly. When we install Nantum, the hardest pieces are tapping into that BMS, and ultimately then, from the aesthetic, putting in occupancy sensors in your lobby and by your access doors. That takes the longest. From the standpoint of deploying the software, the gateway goes in, connects to the internet, you then connect your sensors to that, and you're immediately up and running. So the age of the building has very little to do with it.
Yeah.
I think one of the exciting things here is the bridge from residential into commercial, and a lot of the products we're looking at are some of them in Pat's portfolio are kind of starting to make that bridge. And I'll give an example of my apartment. I moved into a building. It was built in 2012. It's a LEED building, and it had a thermostat for my water source heat pumps that's non-programmable, right? So I've got to set my air conditioning to 72 degrees all the time, right? This is a supposedly modern, well-connected building with about $250 worth of hardware. I put in a Nest thermostat. I put in a network monitoring box. Now, when I or my wife leave the apartment, the network box detects that. We disconnect from the Wi-Fi. It turns off my AC. It turns on my security cameras, right? That idea of just taking little things that are connected. These are all using if this then that. Open source, free software, simple for a non-trained person to use and set up. It's really exciting starting to see some of that technology come into the commercial world. So Radiator Labs is a great example of that. It's really taking that principle, that IoT device, and placing it in a building. Where we struggle is the sort of traditional companies, the traditional control systems that are very closed to that. So we were working last year with a industry standard lighting control system. I won't mention them by name. And we were partnering with this company that was developing light bulbs that had integrated occupancy and temperature sensors in them. We wanted to see if we could take the occupancy signals from those bulbs, give it back to the lighting control system, use that as a backbone, and use that to controlled outlets on the wall, because this bulb didn't have controlled outlets. Absolutely no. Lighting control vendor refused to take an occupancy signal from this other device. So we had to then think about, okay, we're going to have these occupancy sensors in the room that are going to control the lights. I'm going to have to pay money and put a second occupancy sensor on the roof, on the ceiling, and control my controlled outlets with that. You know, the kind of legacy systems that are pretending to be open and really aren't. I really hope this sort of push towards IoT, this push towards open source, I really hope to see them really go away.
It's also bold to tell WeWork no, too.
Yeah.
It's bold for them to tell you no, you guys.
Right.
You know,
I mean, they've now lost
tenant
us as a customer,
right.
because at scale, I'm just not interested in
smaller tenant would have
people
no
that
voice.
are, the interesting people for us are vendors that are really interested in being specialists at kind of a small piece of the pie, and willing to work with other systems and other companies and integrate via API, open source protocols, and actually communicate and share data in a meaningful way. The kind of legacy, backnet BMS systems I really see as a thing of the past.
And more open source also means more user-friendly. And we really have to think about who the audience is and what they need. For instance, we have a company that's taken the Expedia model and applied it to specifying windows. So if you own a small building in Brooklyn and you know it's inefficient, it's throwing all its energy out the windows, and you want to change the windows, you're kind of lost. What should I do? You know 4 manufacturers, you look those 4 up, it takes you a long time. What if you could just enter into a website like Expedia what it is you need? I want double hung, I want black on the outside, white on the inside, I want this, I want that. And up pop 5 choices, some made in countries in Europe you've never heard of, where the lead time is less, the cost is less, it's more energy efficient, and you didn't spend any time. It was all calculated for you on this Expedia-like website. That's what Fentrend does. It's user-friendly, and it saves for the sophisticated user, a contractor, an architect, a building owner. It saves lots of time and lots of resources. As an architect, I know it can take you weeks to do that research. As a building owner, it's just simple and done, and it doesn't cost you anything because the window manufacturer pays Fentrend. So these very simple, open source, user-focused systems are what we really need to do, and a lot of my companies are focusing on that.
I mean, I think it's great. I mean, our industry is definitely, like in the last few years, it's been a focus on innovation. When we talked, even kicking this off, it's about innovation, which also means there's a lot, IoT and sensors and artificial intelligence and big data and smart glass and smart this. There's just a lot to digest, and not all these companies are very large. It's, they don't have a lot of case studies out there yet. I mean, how do y'all really sift through? I mean, your inbox has to be full, and your LinkedIn message, it's all just coming at you. How do you sift through all this? Like, how do you figure out what's applicable, what you can bet on? Because there is some risk working with a smaller company. There's definitely risk, and it's easy to go buy from Johnson Controls or Siemens.
Yeah.
It's very safe, but that's maybe not getting you what you need. How do you guys sift through all this innovation noise?
So we have a 2% acceptance rate into our incubator. I used to work in venture capital. We have a proper due diligence program. When companies come in, we look them over. I care less now. We're a not-for-profit. We don't take any equity in our companies. I care less now about whether they're going to become unicorns, which I used to care about in venture capital. Excuse me. And now I care more about whether they can deliver and whether they're going to be the kind of stand-up entrepreneur who, if it doesn't deliver, will go back and fix it. So we require our companies coming into the incubator, and this is why I say they're market ready, to have top-line revenue so that we can pick up the phone and call customers and say, did they show up? Did it work? And if it didn't work, what did they do about it? Because I care more about the quality of the entrepreneur, the quality of the service. Customer service is everything. And we assess our technology. We always bring in a domain expert. We have on our board people like John, people from Con Ed, the head of R&D at Con Ed. We bring in these people to look over our technologies and make sure they're not just smoke and mirrors. So we're very careful, and with a 2% acceptance rate, we really only get the cream of the crop.
Yeah, I think what property owners are really realizing is that if they focus on a point-by-point solution, they're going to die a death of multiple dashboards. And what we saw very early on was that was the path that we were heading on, and that's why we created Nantum as a single integrated platform that then allows all data to flow to that platform. It will then allow us to share it with our customers so that they can utilize that data. And that's really the threshold, fundamental and foundational technology that many owners are now realizing that they've got to start with, because that then allows to accelerate adoption, to really ultimately identify, and not so much the technology, but the problems that they're trying to solve. If we focus on problems and then look for digital solutions that solve those problems, and then have a foundational platform that you can plug into, then we can begin to share that data with our customers, because Nigel's absolutely right. The problem with the Green Bill is that it doesn't put any responsibility whatsoever on the actual users of the energy in that building. It says, landlord, here's your billy club. You have no juice to ultimately impact to make your tenants do anything other than that they want to do. And if you don't, you get fined. Congratulations, terrific legislation.
We're going to have to work on that.
Yeah.
I'm sure someone's live tweeting right now, so it's good.
Good,
Yeah,
I hope so.
The tenant owner.
Loud and clear.
The tenant owner thing has been a thorn in our side for 10 years. We've got to fix this.
Nigel, what about you guys? I'm sure you guys get hit up. You have a massive community of startups that are in.
Yeah, I mean,
customers.
I'm probably the luckiest one out of us here that we open 50 to 100 sites every month. So I'm in the position that I can try lots of things and see if they work, and then think about scale after that. Scalability obviously for us is key when we're looking for partners. We're excited to try new things, but we need to know it's going to be able to scale and scale globally.
Is there anything you're looking like in this sea of technologies? Is there anything that you've kind of targeted the next couple of years? We really need to explore this type of technology.
Yeah, I mean, we're really focused heavily on providing the tools for the people that use the buildings and also for our community managers. So the way a WeWork space is operated is that there's a community team there that they're really the ones that interact with the members on a day-to-day basis. They're not trained facility staff. They need different kinds of tools than a typical facilities manager would. And so, just being able to inform them and provide them with information. We had a great value story in California last year when there was wildfires happening. Smoke was coming into the city. Everyone was getting concerned. We were able to really rapidly deploy some IEQ sensors into the spaces. We didn't have an IEQ program at that point in terms of being able to provide that visibility to our members directly, but we were able to spin up a dashboard, provide that to our community team very, very rapidly, enabling, really empowering them to have conversations with people when they came in and said, hey, is this space safe to work in or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we say the term smart buildings, there's immediately a focus to the resources of a smart, less water, less energy, how do we track that? But, the biggest thing now is the tenant experience. Consumers more than ever are having amazing experiences in their home, and then they come to a big office building, they wonder why they can't have at least a at-par experience. So smart building has really shifted. It's been around, the term has been around forever. It's really shifting more towards the tenant experience and it being a real experience. How are y'all addressing kind of that need that the tenants want? They want more than just the basics.
Well, we define a smart building as a building that has 3 separate digital conversations that all need to aggregate data in the same place. First, you need to talk to your pumps, fans, motors, elevators. That's Nantum OS. The second is ultimately you need to have a digital conversation directly with your large enterprise tenants as well as small enterprise tenants. That's what we call the tenant fractal. And the third conversation is a tenant experience app. And that's a conversation, digital conversation, with everybody who either lives, works, or visits that building. And that data's all got to come back from an operational standpoint to make the brain smarter, faster.
I'm an MEP engineer. I've always said that for an MEP engineer, you've done your job properly when no one notices, right? The room's at the right temperature for you. Not the right temperature for the facilities engineer, but the right temperature for you, because we all like different temperatures. The lights are at the right level. Everything just works. I don't have to do anything about it. I think that's really where we're trying to drive things, and the technology we're looking at and investing in, things that will bring us more towards that vision. The idea that one of our members in New York, has a meeting in Shanghai, goes there, our app suggests to them, hey, we know you like meeting rooms with a view, so you might want to book this room. We know that you like it at 72 degrees, so we're going to set the temperature for you before you arrive. We know you're coming at 10 o'clock because you've booked the space. Really trying to make that experience completely seamless so people can just get on and work.
And how about we're going to give you that conference room that's on the east side of the building in the afternoon, so the
Exactly.
solar load isn't impacting HVAC in a way.
And one of the frustrating things, I've said it already on this panel, but no one's designing apps for this. The Comfy is one of the very few examples of an app that was really meant primarily for building users. Everything else seems to be starting at the other end and then working its way towards users instead of starting at the users and working its way back. I think Comfy was a great example of that they were looking for. They managed to close that loop, right? They've started with an app that was really designed to improve a user experience. And from that, they've developed machine learning and started running plant more efficiently and being able to diagnose problems. But they've really started with that end user experience, right, rather than starting at the let's solve for efficiency and see where we end up.
Right, because the incumbent product companies, the BMSs, their consumer is the facilities manager. It's not the tenant. And the tenant's a consumer, which means they're highly finicky in terms of how they want to engage and the overall experience they're having. Are you seeing a lot of startups? It's a different model of being more consumer-centric, treating a tenant like a consumer versus a facilities management.
So we've looked at a couple of these. Unfortunately, they haven't applied to the incubator, although I've encouraged them to. Many of them are on the West Coast. What we have seen as far as consumer demand in New York is an appeal for the ability to be able to buy solar power. So we do have 2 community solar companies in our incubator where you can purchase through their websites. One is called the Power Market and one is called Resonant Energy. Through their websites, you can purchase clean, locally generated solar from arrays in Queens and Brooklyn on giant flat buildings. And you can purchase that energy in your apartment in a 42-story high-rise. So that even though you're a tenant, you don't own your roof, and you're on the mid-level of a tall building, you don't have solar panels on your roof, you can be using solar power. So that's the consumer demand that we've seen that we have been able to satisfy.
Yeah. We only have a few minutes left. If y'all each could give everyone a takeaway, walking away from this, that kind of tattoos on their brain when they leave, is there something you could tell people that when they walk away from this they should think about?
Well, carbon emissions are everything, guys. We only have 10 years. We've got to do something about this. And most of our solutions, John's solution, Nantum, these things help your buildings to save money. They help your employees to save productivity and time. They make your operations more efficient. It's absolutely the right thing to do for your bottom line and for the planet. So let's all do this.
I would say in this world of big data, we all need to start thinking about sharing that data in a meaningful way to better inform design, better inform building codes. Lighting level codes were written 30 years ago for using CRT monitors and bits of paper. We now, as an industry, should have access to the levels that people choose to set their lights in a room and be able to use that to inform a better design code. I think one of the things that really excites me about WeWork is being so connected to the users of our building and being able to understand how they use it and feed that back into our design. I'd really encourage all of us to think about that data and think about sharing that with the industry.
All right, John?
Right before Pablo Picasso died, he made a very interesting statement, which was that computers were overrated. And the reason he said that was that they only give us answers. And what's really important in life is to ask the proper question and to frame the proper question. So I would challenge everybody here to ask the question and to frame that question and to really focus on the problems that we all need to collectively solve, and let's go out and solve them.
All right. Thank you very much, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.